Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mentorship, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. My name is Mahaid. I'm the stage manager for this event. I'm pleased to welcome you to our 10th annual Wild Writers Literary Festival, which is brought to you by Wordsworth Books, the Balsivi School of International Affairs, and the New Quarterly Literary Magazine. Before we begin, I would like to extend a heartfelt thanks to our festival donors and sponsors, including the Ontario Arts Council, the NAP Wealth Management team of RBC Dominion Securities, and the Audi Kitchener-Waterloo. And I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for this event, Susan Scott. Susan has an ear for the sublime, the personal and edgy. Transgressive storytelling that inspires change informs her life writing, webinars, and collaborations with fellow artists, activists, and scholars. As TNQ lead nonfiction editor, she championed neglected voices and attracted National Magazine award-winning work that went on to Best Canadian and Best American Essays. As a contributing editor, she directs the Wild Writers Mentorship Program. Learn more from her website or check out her latest book, Body and Soul, and see why Sarah Salicki calls this unorthodox collection a revelation. And now, to begin our session, I will turn things over to Susan, who will introduce Evelyn and Isabella.
Thank you, Maha. It's a beautiful introduction. Welcome to all of you who have set aside time on your busy Sunday afternoons to join us for this really interesting discussion around the ethics, joys, perks, and pitfalls of this vital relationship between writers and the guides that they choose or the guides who choose them. So this is the mentorship panel, and I'm going to introduce my conversation partners, and after that we will dive into the conversation. But just a reminder to you that if questions occur to you as we're talking, you can enter them directly into the Q&A stream, not the chat stream, but the Q&A stream. And at 3:45, so about 45 minutes into our conversation, we'll start looking at those questions, and that will be our way of engaging you. And so anything you have to ask, by all means, go for it. Evelyn Lau is the author of 13 books, including 8 volumes of poetry. She made her debut at age 18 with the publication of her memoir, Runaway, Diary of a Street Kid, which was also made into the CBC movie Diary of Evelyn Lau, starring Sandra Oh. Evelyn's prose books have been translated into a dozen languages. Her poetry has received numerous awards. She has been writer-in-residence at the University of British Columbia, Kwantlen University, and the Vancouver Community College. She's been distinguished visiting writer at the University of Calgary, and she served as Poet Laureate for the City of Vancouver from 2011 to 2014. Evelyn, welcome. You can unmute. Let's unmute as I introduce you. Then we'll keep track of who everybody is.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful. Isabella Wang is the author of the chapbook on Forgetting a Language and her full-length debut, Pebble Swing, which has just come out from Nightwood Editions. Among other honors, she has been shortlisted for ARC's Poem of the Year Award and is the youngest writer to be shortlisted twice for the New Quarterly's Edna Stabler Personal Essay Contest. Isabella's poetry and prose appear in over 30 literary journals and in 3 anthologies. An editor now at Room Magazine, her current projects include 2 poetry manuscripts in progress and a second chapbook forthcoming with Above Ground Press in 2022. Isabella, hello.
Hello.
Hello. So happy you can both join me for this. I actually feel like the lucky one because the two of you already have this incredible patchwork and network between you, and you have a history between the two of you, and you have a really interesting history in your own right, each of you, with mentoring. So I'm just going to dive in and ask you, each of you, Evelyn, I'm going to start with you. When you think of mentor, mentorship, mentoring, just what comes to mind? And can you remember maybe even the first instance when that was a concept that even made any sense to you?
Well, I was fortunate with my early experience of mentorship. I didn't stay in school for very long. I left high school in grade 10, but prior to that, I had a couple of years in an English class where the teacher respected my fierce urge to become a writer enough to actually take my work seriously and give me meaningful critique. And up until meeting him, of course, I mean, from the time I was 6, I was telling everybody I'm going to be a writer. And everyone treated that like as if I'd said I'm going to be an astronaut, yes, sure, pat on the head, what will you want to be tomorrow? And I think there were very few young people like Isabella and, myself at the time who know so unwaveringly what they're going to do with their lives. This is for better or for worse, this is the path that I'm on. And I know it's not going to be a lucrative path, nor necessarily one of, radiant mental health, but this is the one thing that I'm meant to do. And I was fortunate enough to have an English teacher. His name is Robert Best. I can say that after all of these years, who took that seriously and would often meet with me after class, read my work, give me, really careful and not just, not just encouragement, but really strong and sometimes difficult and challenging critiques of what I was giving him, and always sending me back to do more drafts, as he put it, there's, what is that phrase? There's no writing, there's only rewriting. And it was having that kind of relationship in my life early on was a huge gift, and something I tried to replicate, many times after I left home and left school, but with, definitely varying results, which we'll get into.
Okay, that's very interesting. Lots there I want to pick up on. Isabella, do you want to tell us about your experience? What comes to mind?
Yeah, when I think about mentors, I think of you two, because you two, it's just an unbelievable gift to be able to be sitting here today, with two of my literally earliest writing mentors. And like Evelyn, I was, starting out quite young, at 16, just, gravitating toward writing after quitting ballet, needing to express myself again and not knowing what form that would be. And I have the privilege of, getting accepted by the new quarterlies Edna Stapler contest, and you reaching out and just being, I felt like the luckiest kid in the world at 17 to have had, just the experience of such a deep and caring and, high quality level of mentorship that really set the bar for what the standard that I try to, conduct with my own mentorship practices. And likewise, Evelyn, I also had some very wonderful, teachers in high school. My English teacher, who taught me for 3 years, because, after taking 1 year of classes with him, I'm like, yep, that's it. This is a teacher who works for me. I, love the atmosphere of his classes. And, I just begged to be kept in that class. And also, some wonderful science teachers who knew that, who like you, like they knew about like some difficult upbringing and family issues. And so they're just like, nope, forget the exam that's coming up, just write. In my last year, which was so nice of them. But, because I had wanted to write so bad, I took English 12 a year early, did the provincial exam for that year. And that year, your poem, The Mall, was the poem that was featured and the poem that we had to write about. And I think that was like for the first time in my life, like I saw, oh, this is like a contemporary Chinese Canadian author writing about something like the mall, and not shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And so, you know, coming out of the exam, I had your name in my mind, and I looked you up and realized that Evelyn was teaching, you know, a continuing studies creative writing workshop at Simon Fraser. And for a long time, you know, like that workshop setting, that setting of literary readings where people get to connect and share work, that had been envisioned that I wanted so bad, and I just didn't know what to look for. And so, you know, finding that was also a gift. And of course, you know, you've taught me so much in my first year. And I was working with both of you at the same time. And, you know, that was literally, you two were like the center of my world.
Oh, you know, I mean, thank you for your lovely words. I mean, we were staggered to have Isabella in our class. All of us knew, as we were speaking earlier before this panel started, you know, she's the real thing. And it's so rare to have that in a young person, not just the raw talent, but that fierce desire to be a better writer and a willingness to, you know, I mean, I think when you're young, you just soak up every bit of feedback that you get.
Yeah.
And so you had not just the talent, but also the drive. And I think, you know, it made me feel old, because it made me realize how and why perhaps when I was young, some older, you know, potential mentors, writers, teachers were kind of afraid of me or wanted to keep their distance a bit, because, you know, there's the desire to nurture, but there's also very much, I mean, I'm very aware, you know, given some of the ups and downs I went through as a young person, how easily damaged one can be when they're young, you know. I mean, how easy it would be to give the wrong advice, and how that can really be taken to heart. So, I mean, I even remember with you, you know, I think of one thing in particular I said to you that I wish I could take back, even all these years later. And yeah, I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, there's such, I think sometimes having, maybe, you know, if there's anything good out of having bad mentors, and because I never was in a professional program, you know, I never went to university or college or anything. I had to seek my mentorship sort of outside of that. And it seemed like always, you know, you had to pay with a pound of flesh when you're a young woman, right? Mm-hmm. Or, you know, put up with, you know, say your older mentor, you know, just going on and on about, you know, their difficult marriages, or, you know, their personal problems, or whatever it is. And I don't know, it makes me grateful, first of all, that there are more professional programs now. But I think maybe if there is any value in having bad mentors, remember the poet Rachel Rose and I were talking about this, is that it makes you very aware of what you don't want to do when you are a mentor. And very aware of how easy it is to undo the good that you have done. And you do that very quickly, you know, so yeah. Susan.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think part of what's so attractive about the role of a mentor is it is that relationship, that intimate relationship where you feel that deep connection with another person, and you feel as if you can muster all your influence, and that will flow out in some benevolent. This is the ludicrousy of the thinking, that it will flow out in some benevolent stream towards this person, as if this person were this just complete receptacle, you know, completely open and needing everything you have to say. So after a while, it takes some seasoning in the role to realize, oh, actually, this is about mutuality in some way. There is a give and a take here in which the mentor can receive and be taught by the mentee to some degree. I mean, so Evelyn, your comment about wishing you had retracted. Of course, now I want to know what you wish you had retracted.
Same.
Okay, I better be honest.
Okay, go to it.
Am I gonna remember?
No, Isabella, you were going through a rough time at home, you know, as you know, I did too when I was young. And God, I mean, I still kick myself for this. I jokingly said something. Well, I said, I think it was after class, you were worried about being homeless, right? And I said something about, oh, you could always pitch a tent in my living room. And I saw your face kind of light up. And I'm such a grumpy old introvert, right? My partner and I have been together for 22 years. We've never even lived together. I've lived alone since I was 16. So, I mean, I suppose I meant it jokingly. And I could see, there was a moment of where you thought, I meant it seriously. And did you?
No, I was just like so delighted that you would even like offer that or like say that, but I would have never expected
I
that.
shouldn't have said it. I shouldn't have said it. And I mean, again, it's boundaries, right? Too, Susan, right? That's another word that we need to keep in mind. But I thought, how stupid am I? I mean, it's just not, and I guess I'm just, I'm very aware, of maybe I'm hyper aware of how when somebody is really young, that power differential, as you talked about, is a very real thing. And it's, it made me more aware that I had to have more boundaries when somebody is a lot younger versus, a lot of the people I've mentored have actually been older than me, right? So it's, they bring a different set of life experiences, right? And a different confidence, right? So the word benevolence, we want to know at the end, certainly at the end of our lives, that we've had more of a benevolent influence on upcoming people than a negative one, right? When we sort of do that balancing. And but it is so easy to have a negative influence on somebody, sometimes unintentionally.
Exactly. And this is what's so interesting about both of your stories, because you both came into the limelight really young, pretty much exceptionally young for the standard literary story, right? And with very personal works. And so I guess that's a question that I have is from your experience, I feel like the two of you can speak to this. How do you know what to look for? How do you set those boundaries? So let's imagine that we're just talking to someone who is just coming into the literary scene, regardless of their age. What would you recommend they look for, and what would be the red flags that they should watch for?
Isabella, would you like to speak to that first?
I mean, I think the difficult thing is that when you are so young, or like even just an emerging writer, like, if you think about mentorship and being mentored as a craft itself is something that you literally just learn over time. And it's something where the instinct isn't driven into you when you start. It's something you develop over time, right? And the sad thing is, if you're lucky, then like me, then I was very lucky to have had, mentors where, if looking back at my like 17-year-old self, I will tell you, okay, these two people are people you could trust. You can work with them as a mentor-mentee dynamic. But I mean, like, full disclosure, you and Fiona weren't the only Canadian studying creative writing workshops being offered, right? Mm-hmm. And I have taken several, and among all of them, I think I was closest with you guys, just because it was poetry, but I have taken others, and those all went very well. Mm-hmm. But there had been one where I had thought about taking, and I didn't because it didn't work out with school. And only later, just listening to the dynamics in the class, from a much more like experienced perspective, I like still now to this day, I'm like, thank God I didn't take it, because had I been drawn into that environment, my guard down because I was so young, it would have been very bad. Mm-hmm. But I think instinct, gut instinct, and also time, two things, like over time, like is the mentor someone who's still, who is still the same, supportive, caring person as the one who started out working with you? And, does your gut still feel that they are the right person working with you? And are there any red flags you're sensing, right? Those are my tips.
Right. I used to be quite cynical and say, the better the writer, the worse the mentor. Like, or the worse the person,
Yeah.
the worse the personality. I mean, certainly, and over the years, I've discovered that's not true, but it seemed to be so for a while. So I think, at the end of the day, we learn, I would think, best from actually reading the person's work, right? Who the writer is as a human being may not be that relevant, or as a teacher. They may not be the best teacher. It's because they put their best selves into their work, right? So, at the end of the day, I feel like I've learned the most in terms of becoming a better writer from reading, not from trying to interact from the person who wrote those words. However, I think, particularly if you're somebody who hasn't gone through a formal, education, you're all the time looking for opportunities to learn from the people around you. And sometimes, a mentor teaches you not perhaps how to be a better writer, but how to be a better person, how to be gracious, how to be generous, how to be benevolent. And certainly I have seen, my fair share of, or gotten to know my fair share of writers who have taught me that, which is just as important. So I think, we had talked a little bit before, and Susan, I was hoping you would talk a bit about how, you had a very negative experience when you were when you were in a professional mentorship program as a mentee. I think in terms of red flags, I've been shocked actually at the number of people who have come to me over the years and said that they felt creatively completely shut down by somebody that they worked with in a professional mentorship program, where they actually stopped writing for several years because they felt so belittled, or they were made to feel like they had no talent somehow. And that to me is just shocking. Yeah, that's not how you work as a mentor. You aren't just blindly encouraging all the time, but you don't just shut somebody down like that. But I've heard a lot of stories like that. So and it sounded like that was kind of what you went through.
Yeah, this is really concerning too. So I'll relay my experience just because it's fodder for all of this. But what you're saying is so important too, because why are we not putting things in place where we really reflect on these experiences in some way? And the problem I think with sort of mentoring now is there's such a kind of idealistic gloss to it. And I don't feel as if perhaps we've developed the robust vocabulary for talking about boundaries and talking about when it fails, or what good and bad iterations are, when a mentor is burned out perhaps and needs to step back, and stepping back in a formal way is better than perhaps ghosting people. What can we do? What we need to do something. I think a conversation like this I really like. It's so valuable because it just creates a space to think about all sides of this issue. That's what I like. Evelyn, you came up with the good, the bad, and the ugly. That was your phrasing, and I think it's exactly what we need to talk about. So I've gravitated to running mentorship programs and doing mentoring because I had such a lousy experience, in a really reputable program with being ghosted by the mentor. First of all, being scolded, I would say, directly, like I would call it scolding, not critique that's helpful, but scolding. And the kind where you're kind of going, oh, was this a bad day did I trigger something in this person? And when you talk long enough with other people, sometimes people are having similar experiences as well. But then the ghosting, and the problem being at the time, I certainly lack the tools personally to know what to do in an instance like that. And I think that's something I really would like to hear the two of you talk about, because what mechanisms do you have at your disposal if you're the mentee who doesn't know what to do, if it isn't working, if the experience is failing, or it's not working, or you really feel that something's not being honored in the agreement? You know, what do you need to do? And the problem being, in that power differential, the mentee often feels quite powerless and doesn't really know where to go with it, except to often self-blame, or a kind of checking in with everybody else other than the mentor or the supervisor to find out, is this happening to you? Is this happening to you? So that's not a very functional system. So I would love to hear either or both of you just respond to that in some way.
I think one of the things you touched on is, you know, when we talked about red flags, I think a red flag is if the mentor is imposing their needs upon you. I mean, like when you were wondering, oh, you know, is that person having a bad day? Well, that person shouldn't be, you know, if they're having a bad day, they can do that in private. I mean, they shouldn't be imposing that on you. I mean, particularly if it's a professional relationship, it's not a friendship, right? It's not even a volunteer relationship. I mean, they have a job, and, you know, and you'd like to think in that mentorship relationship, you are giving more, you know, than just, you know, the parameters of it, because I think it does bring out, it certainly has the opportunity to bring out the best parts of ourselves in terms of that desire to give and genuinely to mentor, you know, an upcoming generation, or, you know, a voice maybe from, you know, a community that hasn't been heard before and so forth. But yeah, I mean, if somebody starts, you know, and I certainly had this experience as a mentee, you know, yeah, starts telling you all about their marital problems, and it's not a good sign, you know, if that's that becomes the
so Evelyn, what did you do at that point? So what resources did you draw on? So there's the question, right? What does the mentee do at that point?
Well, unfortunately, you know, I wasn't, you know, this is the whole thing about not being in a professional relationship. It was somebody who was volunteering their time. So, and of course, you know, at the time, just consistently pestering me for sex, you know, until I eventually gave in, right? And saw that as being a price to pay for the amount of time he had spent reading my work and generously giving feedback. Right. So, yeah, it's unfortunate, because, you know, when I think back on that, you know, I think of how, yeah, that ended up erasing all the perceived good that he had done, you know, in my mind. Prior to when it began deteriorating, I saw him as somebody who was generous and giving and genuinely believed in my work. But of course, when it went downhill like that, you know, now, so many decades later, I don't look back on that relationship as being a positive one in my life. And that's sad, right? You know, I mean, the person is, you know, I mean, I'm sure he'd like to feel now as if, you know, it probably would be more important to him now to think that he had helped a young and upcoming writer, and show genuine interest in their work, as opposed to just, well, you know, he was able to sleep with a young woman. I mean, that's such a fleeting thing, right? As opposed to something, you know, that you've really, you know, where you've really had the opportunity to give of yourself and encourage, you know, a young writer. So
that's such a beautiful language. The way I love the way you put that. It's like he missed that opportunity to be his best self.
Yeah. And don't, you know, I mean, you may not realize this when you're younger, when it seems like it's more about pushing boundaries. And that is, I think, part of your job as a young writer, to sort of push the boundaries, right? And forge something new. But I think as you get older, it's more about, you know, what have I given that has not had strings attached, or, you know, that was genuinely, you know, that genuinely added something to somebody else's life. Exactly. Isabella?
I mean, yeah, I'm taking in so much of what you're saying, and of course, so much resonates with me. I mean, especially as, you know, women, or younger writers or BIPOC writers or like, any of those categories or emerging writer. Just given the dynamic of, a mentor, someone you look up to mentoring you and reading your work and giving you feedback, right? Whether that's in a paid or volunteer position. Like at least I think like we often feel that, if something goes wrong in our gut, we're so afraid of like, offending the other person, hurting the other person, projecting that fault onto ourselves. And often we will, sacrifice a piece of ourselves, whether like, in a lot of forms to avoid confrontation, right? And I think, and that is really hard. And I've been in similar situations where literally, it required other people looking in to first tell me, right, that this is wrong because I was just trapped amidst it. And also then for things to really hit rock bottom. And for me to be lucky enough that, there were people who trusted me to actually pull me out of the situation. But very, similarly, someone, wanting to support a young writer, but there were all kinds of strings attached, and someone knowing that because I had, certain connections in the literary community, right, was subconsciously saying things to me to kind of shift the way that I position myself in relation to others in the community and kind of, just control the way that I'm acting and performing in front of certain people, right? And then there was like the drugs and everything else, but just wasn't a safe situation. I knew in my gut, like very early on, that something was wrong. And for a long time, and what other people, like what I needed other people to do was tell me that, you have the right to pull yourself out of the situation. You are not obliged to orient your own self toward that other person's feelings or needs. And what was the other thing? Like, yeah. And I guess I'm losing my track, so I'll let you guys continue.
What you're saying is so dead on. I mean, and you're describing this incredible thing. There's the dyad, right, of the mentor mentee, but then you're talking about how incredibly important community is around that and what's reflected back to you when you're in the middle and you can't tell that there's something wrong. It feels wrong, but you don't know what to do. But having other people who can say, you need to extricate yourself, or what can we do, or how can we help? So something about that supportive structure. Evelyn, you want to speak to this? Something that's larger than just maybe what the one-on-one that's happening might also be helpful for balance or perspective. Or do you want to say anything about that?
I don't know if I have much to say about that, but I did want to add something to Isabella's thing. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a sexual thing. It can be an ego thing, right? Where, another writer's ego just, swallows you up, right? And the fact that you are their protege is just reinforces that ego, but you have to subsume yourself and your own voice in order to keep getting their praise and their support, right? So that can be really insidious as well too, and again can be a diminishment of yourself. Like you're giving up parts of yourself. It doesn't have to be your body. It can be, your voice. It can be your own sense of who you are. So these are all kind of more subtle things. In some ways they're more difficult, right? Because if it's just sex, then that's, there's a label on it and there's, it's cut and dried and defined. But when it's more a kind of, a kind of giving up of yourself in order to continue to have that person's support or guidance, that can be a very difficult thing to explain to other people and to monitor in yourself in terms of what are you willing to sacrifice. And the person, a good mentee should be bringing out, or a good mentor rather, should be, recognizing your voice and heightening it, giving you tools to heighten it, as opposed to getting you to write in the style that they, that is theirs, or that
Exactly.
yeah.
That too.
And that, I think that is
Yeah.
something that happens a lot in mentor-mentee relationships, that the mentee feels like in the process they lost their own voice because they had to write the way that their mentor wrote in order to get praise and encouragement.
I mean, I talk about time when it comes to trust and mentorship, depending on what it is. If it's just like for a journal, like publication, that's different, right? But something that takes time. I talk about that, but there is a lot that can be sensed very quickly just from that initial, interaction. Does the mentor state, right up front, this is your work, this is your voice, my feedback, take it or leave it.
Right.
How are they giving feedback? Is it all criticisms? Is it a projection of them? Is there care in that work? Are they explaining their own edits? Or, is it fueled by this kind of egocentric thinking of, I know everything, I am more accomplished, and so I can just throw my feedback out there, right? And ultimately how they respond and react when, say, you reject something, or say this isn't what I'm looking for, right?
Exactly.
Yes, you have to fight for your own voice. And I think, and I mean, a good mentor and a good editor, I mean, they expect that conversation. And in fact, they thrive on that sort of that give and take. They expect you to defend, and they acknowledge that everything that they put forth is ultimately a suggestion, right? It's not a demand or a command. And it is that give and take that is, rich, not just for the mentee, but also for the mentor, because they learn as well too through that conversation, through really chewing through a piece of work with somebody. It's just as rich for them in many, many ways, as long as they're willing to have that conversation with you, and they absolutely should.
Exactly. So let's just maybe for the moment, because I want to move on to your readings. I want to make sure we protect the time to hear from your readings. So let's just tag this as maybe the distance between a transformative and a transactional relationship. And if people want to revisit that in the questions, we can come back to it, because I feel like we could just spend a whole hour, we kind of need a whole workshop just on those dynamics that you've identified, because it's just so critical. And everything that two of you have said, I hope people are making notes as we speak, because it's so valuable just to hear how you've clothed these experiences. So reading, Evelyn, you have one poem you're going to read. Isabella, you have a longer piece. Okay, do you want to?
Two short ones.
Okay, Evelyn, do you want to set this up for us, please?
Sure. Okay, so I'll read Isabella, you're familiar with this poem, Earthworms, from my latest book. And I'm reading it because I wrote this poem for the students of our class, the class that Fiona and I taught at a weekend class at SFU. And I wrote it because I am kind of perverse. I've been hearing, the students have been writing these poems about, nature and so forth, and small animals. And there was such, the people who are drawn to poetry tend to be such lovely, compassionate, gentle people. And I wanted to do something completely out of left field and write a poem about the pleasure of cruelty. So I think I traumatized a few students. But most of them are, Isabella was the exception. She was the young person. Everybody else was, a lot of them.
I loved it.
So, Earthworms. Let's see if I can read this. I'm getting old, my goodness. I can hardly see the page. This is frightening. Okay, I have to hold it out like this. I used to chop them up as a child, I confessed to the room full of poetry students, expecting collusion. Weren't all children cruel? But their dismayed faces said no. We had just read a poem about earthworms, sprawled in the hundreds across the sidewalk after a deluge, the poet stepping gingerly among the stranded creatures. Again, I saw myself crouched on the pavement, penknife poised above a meaty tango, halving, quartering, wondering when the worms would stop regenerating, if that was a myth anyway, nearly weeping with the power I wielded. In my mother's garden, I observed the heave of a slug's body sprinkled with salt, a spider's 8 legs cringing under a cloud of insecticide, the satisfying crunch of a snail's whorled house underfoot, the destruction of that architecture like the snap and crackle of shells on a beach. The students' upturned faces trusting me with their fragile words. What would they think of the shining hours I spent by the balcony doors, torturing flies? Watching their frantic skitter up the glass as my scissors flashed over their intricate bodies, snipping away a gossamer wing, a quivering leg. I'm not talking a shameful episode or two after being scolded or spanked. This was a private hobby in the slow hours of summer, a kind of heaven to inhabit a time outside of time, a bubble of pure concentration. How lovely it was to be the bully for a change.
Wow, that's fabulous. That's incredible. Okay, Isabella, tell me what that book is from, first of all, so we know. Can you hold up the book?
Oh, me?
Yeah, so everyone knows.
Pineapple Express.
Oh yeah,
It's very good.
Of course. Fantastic. Oh my God, that's beautiful. That's fabulous. So I'm only going to rush because of time, and then come back and ask you more about that. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Benevolence and cruelty. Covering the waterfront. I love it. Okay, Isabella, where are you taking us?
Right. So this past week, both of these poems have been written this past week, when we lost 3 very special poets in the community, 2 of which had been mentors to me. There was Atal Adnan, who has been an incredible mentor in writing all the way up until she was 96. Lee Miracle, who taught a workshop that I attended once, gave really generous feedback. And Phyllis Webb, who has been really special to me and also many of my mentors. And so after, their passing, this has been my way of responding to, some of the people that I care about and who really miss, Phyllis and Lee and Atal. So this first poem, and these are all written as epistolary caesuras or letters. This first one is for Lee, Phyllis, and Atal. Where have the poets gone? The wise, the sager than us elders who rocked generations of poets into their world, but always insisted that they do the following. Because we are ready, they say. This world, they've taught us that leading is remembering the ones who ask, are they still thinking about us? Did we at once gather them and hold them warm this November month? Tell them that nights echo thoughts of how much they are with us? Did we gather enough poems that tell them we still kind of need them? In this world, did we gather a light for them daily? Days when we are cold and not ready to see the places they found and are traveling to be present for. This one I wrote yesterday. And yesterday was my professor Steve's birthday, who was very close with Phyllis. And it's also written to Fred Waugh, Pauline Butling, Diana Hayes, and Smaro Camarelli, who all very much cared about Phyllis. 7 days mark, then 11 after 11. Most things we love are still here with us. It's your birthday, beginning of another 7 years to forge a safe harbor in her wake, to ember the summer revolutions of love and love and love. Poetry isn't just in the song of the grieving, but right now it sings the song of our most natural grieving. Phyllis knows we've dreamt of her by the undercommons of the bridges, every bodies of water, that without her, we are canoeing our balance on the unstable boiled up maple logs of a stormy Monday past. But that the shell we brought for her is collecting water, rimmed and before us, still afloat. There is love in the dream, Fred, Pauline, Smarrow, Diana, sending her emails. In the dream, she'd left us her messages. Tomorrow, hear you, and here, Phyllis. Or was it here, Here, she wrote. But the shell she kept levitated for us, teased playfully to be carried away with wind of water if we didn't keep her up close.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much, both of you. And just time being what it is, I'm asked to go directly to the questions, but partly just so we can open up the conversation and the responses, right? Because people have been sitting with us for this time and I think really want to respond to the two of you. So let me go to those. And here is one. Let's begin with this one. As a middle-aged gay male writer who has experienced a lot of relational and spiritual abuse and trauma, I'm so grateful to writer friends who believed in and encouraged me. The community of writers has helped me become a better person. As I strive to find my footing and treat my colleagues more respectfully, I'm grateful for your wisdom today. When you are getting to know someone whose experience and work you value, how do you find the right balance between friendship and mentorship? Hey.
Oh, yeah, deep.
Oh.
It's interesting. There are some people that I have mentored in a professional context who have subsequently become friends, and that's lovely. You know, I feel like they're my children, right?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of that, whether they're older than me or just a few years younger, and typically not much younger than that. I mean, I think I'm weirdly obsessed with age because I started so young, right? Like I'm just yeah, I don't want to be responsible for anybody under 40.
Feels like a long time ago.
Yeah, I'm too scared of damaging them. But yeah, it's interesting. Even if we, the ones who have become friends, you go for coffee, you go for a walk or something a few times a year. And it's, I'm always happy to see them. It is like, oh, my kids are coming home, right? But I'm still like a little bit careful with them because I'm still very aware that they, how the relationship began, right? And so maybe I'm less, I wouldn't, again, perhaps burden them with some personal stuff that's going on with me the way that I might friends that I didn't have that initial relationship with. So maybe it's almost like a little bit of a, I don't know, it's like if one became friends years later with one's former therapist. I mean, there's still, there's still something, and I don't want to sort of, maybe that comparison is not quite accurate, but in the sense that when you are working with somebody, particularly somebody who's fairly new to writing, or you are maybe even the first person who's ever read their work, there is that sense of dealing with something very delicate and private and personal to them, whether or not the content is personal or revealing. The very fact that it's something that they feel that they're almost shaking when they're handing it over to you, because it is something that you're the first person who's ever laid eyes on it. I mean, that's such a delicate thing. So I'm always aware, even like many years later, going for a walk on the seawall with the person, it's, I'm still kind of a little bit, maybe just, a little bit on guard as to perhaps not somehow crossing some boundary there. I don't know. I mean, do you think that's appropriate, Susan, or?
Oh yeah, I feel that very much. I resonate with that a great deal. So also when I'm just thinking about what we're talking is the Wild Writers gods have granted us an extra 15 minutes if we want to take it. So if we want to stay with it, we can do that. We're kind of on a roll here. If anybody needs to leave, that's fine. But I love the richness of the things that everybody is saying. So if we're okay with that, we can just ride this out for a few more minutes. Okay. And I really want to hear from the two of you and from the questions that are pouring in. If there's time, I will add my own 2 cents, but this is really space that I think is critical. So one of the questions here is, what questions should you ask a potential mentor? But also, given what you were saying, Evelyn, what questions would you ask a potential mentee? So if you're just kind of sniffing out the relationship, right, or you're just wondering, because we've pretty much been assuming that it's teachers, editors, and fellow writers. I think that those are the real categories that we've kind of talked about of people to draw from. So boundaries,
expectation.
Yeah.
Expectation is a word that comes to mind. What is the person hoping for? What are they expecting? I mean, a red flag for me is if somebody, and this sort of thing has happened. Somebody is approaching me to edit their poetry manuscript. And they are, first of all, they think they're going to be the next Rupi Kaur. And they're going to be on the New York Times bestseller list. And if I give advice as, if, I'm advising them to, get involved with the community, go to readings, maybe, debut some of these poems at open mics, if they've never had any publishing experience, and they refuse to do that because they're afraid their poems will be stolen. There's an ego at work there and an expectation, and and they're worried I might in fact steal their work or something, there are sometimes people who come with unrealistic expectations of the fame and fortune that a Canadian poet can have in this life, which is zero, right? But and of course prose, I think prose, realistically, there was more expectation in terms of sales and in terms of, agents or working with bigger publishers. But even then, I'm a little, I want to test out in terms of personality. I mean, if I really feel that something should be published by, say, a small press, is that something that they are open to? If I think their voice, their subject, their style suits a small press, or are they expecting, again, something to be on the bestseller list and they expect to be working with Random House or HarperCollins? So it's expectation. If, how I view the manuscript and the direction it's going is not what they view it as, then immediately that is, I think there's just too much of a disjuncture there, and I wouldn't be doing them any favors. Perhaps they can find somebody who agrees with them that the work is going off in that direction, but that's not where I can help guide them, and I don't think I would be helping them.
Mm-hmm. And would you use language like that? How would you say that? How would you respond to someone then when they say that? Would you say, I don't think this is a fit, or I mean,
it's more of a fit. Yeah, exactly. Okay. It's more of an issue of fit. It's not right or wrong. It's not, it's just, I mean, a fit is really important. And it's not just in terms of the writing and expectation, but personalities, right? I mean, if sometimes, I have met somebody, for just a very short, like say like an hour long session where they're approaching me with 15 pages. And it's very obvious to me. I don't know if it's obvious to them, but our personalities are just not a good fit.
Right.
And I think it's really important to not, I can just see it being a disaster down the road. And again, it's not a right or wrong. It's just, it's not going to be a comfortable or beneficial relationship. So it is such an intimate thing that you're dealing with, someone's writing. And I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, going into every mentorship relationship, I remind myself of what a privilege it is that somebody is showing me something that quite often they haven't, they may not even have told their partners or their parents or their children or their closest friends that they write. And here they are trusting me with this, right? So, I mean, I always remind myself that is a real privilege and not something to be taken lightly. And if I'm not the right person, let them know early on so they can find somebody who is a better fit.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I feel like we're slowly building this great vocabulary here. So here's a really interesting one to build on. Oh, so Isabella, think about this one then. Is it possible to have a good mentorship, so relationship, even if you disagree politically with your mentor or have very different interests and life experiences?
Oh,
Where would you like to go with that one?
oh, it's funny because I can actually answer this. So in university, I think just because I've done a lot of stuff with creative writing, and I'm also like, I like to like push the rules a little bit. I've been very lucky to be able to choose who I take classes with. There have been classes where year one, semester one, first day of university, I went into the class, went to office hours after, and I was like, nope, not this guy. But I was able to take another class where I've developed a long, beautiful, caring dynamic with my professor, because in the university classroom atmosphere, because we've worked with each other for several courses over several years. And so also because I was in a very vulnerable place when I started university, I've been careful enough to be like, if this professor works, I'll stick with him. And it is only in my last 2 years actually that I started venturing out and taking courses with other professors, just to want to work with work with their different talents. But in the earlier years, I literally just stuck with 4 profs, and I took 9 classes with this one world literature professor. And the two of us, we can't be any more different. He is so brilliant, knows all of these theories. Like, just his mind is just so like colorful, but he doesn't think that he's very smart or his classes are very hard. And so he often will not acknowledge how confusing his classes are. And of course, and then me and my buddy friends in class will then literally gang up and tease him about how difficult his classes are. And then there's this kind of like, and then like we start roasting each other quite literally. But just fundamentally, we are very different writers and thinkers and learners. For him, I'm sure he struggles with essays too, but that is the discourse and the vocabulary that comes most natural for him. Whereas for me, because I'm a poet, my mind does not think in the linear structures of an essay. In my first years, it was so painful. And he couldn't believe how much I was struggling to write an essay because, I had all of these publications and I was like a writer. But the thing is, like, it was like, a mentorship dynamic that also grew out over time. And over time, he learned about the ways I learned because I knew that it was okay to challenge him and resist him. There was once where he was like, Isabella, why can't you write in a linear fashion in an essay? And so for the revision, I literally cut up my essay sentence by sentence and pieced it together into this long pieced together collage that was taller than me. And I brought it to his office. And, I would resist him, but, we would have a lot of fun doing that. And he loved it. And he loved to be challenged. But over time, and the thing is, he never he was one of the first professors where I thought it was okay to fail and not have the best work out. And somehow, I realized over time that he's still supporting me and, it's okay. Like in the classroom atmosphere, he has to mark me for my work, which isn't very good in the beginning. But that, as a person, he was still very supportive. And he taught me a lot about being human. And so that is one, I think, experience where we're very different. We, do this all the time and we have fun doing this, but, it still works. And that's why I've taken 9 classes with him.
Mm.
And you get to bring your whole self. That's the beauty of it. That is beautiful. Okay, apropos of that, here's a question from Lana Cullis. Are there distinctions between mentoring the person's authorial voice, and mentoring the person themselves? If there are, how do you tune into the different aspects? Yeah.
I'm not sure it's
Interesting.
delineated in a kind of visible way, right? I mean, sometimes we don't know at the moment what we're taking away or what we're giving in a conversation until much later. But I guess, I think of, writers who perhaps, I think of one writer in particular, I think, who tried to mentor me, intended to mentor me. I don't think I particularly respected his writing, but I respected him as a person, So, I think of him, he's since passed away. I think of him fondly, and I think of him as being a positive influence in my life, because I think, there were many, there was, genuine kind of benevolence in that friendship or that relationship. But he certainly didn't teach me anything in terms of how to write. Again, I have to emphasize that I think, really, you learn best from reading, and from reading in a really disciplined fashion. One sort of thing that I force myself to do when I'm really interested in a poem and the choices the poet has made in the writing of that poem is that I will write it out by hand. And the effort of doing so, really makes me examine, this, why that comma there, why that line break there. So it's kind of paying attention to the person's work and feeling as if I am being given an insight into their process by that somewhat arduous, exercise. And of course, endlessly reading it out loud. Hearing the words, and again, pausing to think about the choices along the way. And I think I learn much more doing something like that than I would, seeking out that poet and, even taking a class from them. This is kind of what this is how I've always conducted my life. So I think there is at the end of the day, it is the words themselves and not the person, but all the people in our lives teach us ways in which we can better ourselves, and also, just as usefully, ways in which we don't want to conduct ourselves, right? That's just as useful as being inspired by somebody.
Good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I agree. I absolutely love that exercise of just rewriting a piece from someone else. What you learn doing that is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, which is why I think of a lot of my favorite mentors as being dead authors. I still feel deeply connected. That's writing for you, the living and the dead. There's barely a difference because when you feel that connection, feel you're being tutored at a deep, deep level, and that genius is accessible to you somehow through connecting with the writing. And so connecting with the person, I feel, is a completely different project, a very different exercise. And I think you, Isabella, are particularly gifted as your sort of generous, spirited, very receptive, respectful soul. I feel you're someone who kind of move through life and connect with the living writers and with those who have already gone on, and you just sort of absorb it all and take it all in. But not everyone, I think, is maybe tuned that way or turned that way, or maybe needs to have, or is able to receive in the way that you're able to receive. So just
Yeah,
put that
thank
out
you.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
May I add something onto that question?
Sure.
And I think this applies more in the context of long-term mentorships where, it's in a program where their career is, in question here, as opposed to just say a one-on-one, one-time thing of a manuscript or a piece. But in those longer mentorships, I think, there are always times where like a mentor might see the value of your voice, the value of your work, but are there also, and like good mentors will want the best for you, right? And they'll give suggestions of things you should do, opportunities you should do. But are they also willing to allow you to take the pace you need to just exist and be human? Because, sometimes you need to do that too. And so, I think for the mentors that I've stayed with, every one of them has tried to direct me onto certain trajectories, opportunities with the best of intentions. And some I've taken, some I haven't, but I've stayed with all of them because, there have been times where I've had to say no to something and there was none of that pushback or anything. They're just like, okay, then be yourself. That's what we want for you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So they just help hold the space for you to develop and as you develop and deepen as a person, your work is going to deepen as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it all sounds so simple. Oh, sounds so simple. Why is it so hard to do? Okay, so here's a question from someone who is anonymous. I am one of an army of retired folk beginning to write poems, memoirs, and stories. We have the advantage of life experience as nurses, engineers, truck drivers, homemakers, or farmers, but I feel that most of us would benefit from writing mentors, even if we are sought after as mentors in other contexts. How would/should the mentor-mentee relationship differ for an older person? And we're in our last 5 minutes, so this is our kind of closing envelope. So
Evelyn, you go. You've worked more with older writers.
I'm more comfortable with older writers, and I think it is that fear of somehow damaging somebody or taking responsibility for somebody who's younger than myself and not somehow handling it the way that I should. And I don't have that fear of working, with an older person. And of course, I'm fascinated, having essentially only been a writer, my whole life. I mean, this has been my whole life. I'm fascinated by people who've had full careers doing other things, truck driver, engineer, etc., nurse. And I'm hungry for knowledge of the minutia of those lives, right? So I get great satisfaction out of learning about people's lives that have been very different from mine. So, I suppose there's more of an eagerness on my part, and wanting to hear those stories. and wanting to learn. So yeah, I think I feel I do have to remember that you know, like some of the people we had in that class were retired people who had perhaps in most cases always had a love of the arts, but in some cases were just for the very first time, you know, dipping their toe in the water. And so despite their rich careers and their rich lives, they were sometimes very tentative and very unsure, more so than a younger person, right? So I have to remind myself of that, that just because they are older and have had so much life experience doesn't mean that they have hardly any experience or confidence in this area. So yeah, so that's something that's important, I think, to remember.
Exactly. And I would say in the Wild Riders, in the mentorship program, for instance, we will often have older people. And the beauty of that is kind of moving in a very much in a conversational mode, being able to take into account not so much just what's happening on the page, but all the questions they bring, all the questions, right? In a big conversation, because if they haven't had that formation that we might automatically expect from another context, they're coming with this urgency, right? This desire, this appetite, this feeling. Sometimes they put writing on hold their whole lives, and this is their one chance to be able to do it. And so it's that beautiful connection, that kind of chemistry with them to say, well, what all is coming up for you? Where would you like to go with this? We'll talk about your writing, but what else is there for you? And sometimes it's just that it is that huge piece of their lives that they really are ready to share with someone in the writing world who will understand that, right? So they're no longer isolated. That part of them is no longer closeted or isolated, but they're in the company of someone who is thrilled to kind of welcome that side out and say, okay, let's play. Show me what you got. Let's have a great time. Let's have a beautiful time together. So that's what I love about working with people who've had all kinds of life experience. So that's the beauty of that.
Yeah. And sometimes there's a terrific bluntness. I remember this older woman coming to me and just very bluntly saying, you know, so do you think, you know, this is worth my time, you know, this thing that she had written in terms of pursuing it? Because, you know, frankly, I'm 86 and I don't have a lot of time left and I don't want to waste it. So please tell me. Let's stop it right now and I'll go on and do something else that I want to do as opposed to wasting my precious time. So, I mean, it's great.
I love that. I love it. Okay, so that's our first job, and on our closing note, right? Just be real, like be authentic, you know, cut to the chase, and yeah, and be trusting, boundaries, all of it. I have to thank you just a million. You've just been fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful, thoughtful, provocative questions.
This was a to die for conversation for me. So we'll come up with something, some really fun. Someday when I can transport myself to Vancouver, we'll do it over.
Please come. Please come.
Yes.
Thank you, Maha. Just been fantastic.
Thank you, Evelyn, Isabella, and Susan. It was a very heartfelt talk, listening to you share your early writing journeys as mentees and now your roles as mentors too. In closing, I want to remind our viewers that all our writers' books are available for purchase online from Wordsworth Books. Visit our online book table for a handy overview of all our festival authors' books. Thank you so much for attending tonight's session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.